Welcome back. Today's story filled with drama and unexpected turns. Hit like, subscribe, and let's jump in.
I opened my eyes and found myself underwater. The water was warm and salty. I was naked and alone. I couldn't tell how many times this had happened before, but I was coming back to life again. The sun would rise soon. I had to get out of the water and restart, pick up my life once more. I'll explain. I was born so long ago that I cannot remember the number of years that have gone by, maybe 2,800 to 3,800 years. Every time I died or was killed, I woke up later in a warm pond of salt water located on a small island somewhere in the world. It was like being reborn, except that my body was returned to that of a 23-year-old in perfect health. I remembered everything from my previous lives. I forgot nothing. Each time I was reborn, those past lives moved further into the back of my mind. The older memories faded from the forefront. They were clear and could be pulled forward, becoming stronger if I worked on remembering. I knew that soon I would be beginning another life. Someone had taken my last life. From past experience, I knew that I would be healed of my wounds completely. My body would be exactly the same as it was over these centuries. My features would be perfect, my body scar-free, and my hair would return to its original blonde. Any woman would look at me and feel her heart start to flutter. I could look at a woman and have her surrender herself to me. I was that handsome. After living as many years as I had, I was very intelligent. Someone said that life is a great teacher. I had lived many lives, so I guess I was well taught. I raised myself up out of the water and began to plan my new life. For the last 300 years, civilization had progressed so far that now I had to create a paper trail to explain my being here. In my prior lives, I had started this procedure so that when I awakened, I would already have birth records, a social security number, a driver's license, and all those pesky little documents normal people take for granted. I saved my money, and I made investments. Over the years, I had accumulated mountains of money in various accounts. Because of these habits, I was a billionaire many times over. But I had the money hidden from human eyes. It was split over many identities in many different accounts in many different banks in many different countries. I started to assume my new life. It suddenly occurred to me that I had not died of natural causes, I had been terminated. This was not unusual. I had been executed and had suffered many mishaps over the years. The instant that I died, my body would vanish, and I would reappear in this pond. Only this time, it was different. I was terminated by my loving wife, Lauren. I began bringing memories of my past life to the forefront. I needed to know why she betrayed me because I might need to protect myself from her. I wanted revenge, so I started concentrating on how it all began so I could make my plan. My past memories of Lauren drifted into my conscious mind. The memory started with me visiting one of the many businesses I already owned on an inspection tour. I had a lot of businesses I'd accumulated over the years. My habit was to buy and sell my existing businesses to myself. I know it doesn't sound right, but just think, every 100 years or so, I had to die, or people might start noticing me. So I sold my current businesses to other businesses I owned under my next identity, and on it went. Because of my physical regeneration, no one alive at the current time would still be alive when I reappeared. All my old friends and companions would have long since died by the time I showed back up. And if anyone was still alive when I returned, who would believe the ramblings of a 100-year-old individual? They would listen to the person and then dismiss their claims of me being old as just dementia. The only thing I had to do was be careful of photographs, and even the few that snuck past my scrutiny were not usually believed by anyone who saw them. People naturally thought that they were seeing lookalikes or distant relatives. No one lived that long, or so they thought. There were times over the years when I visited women I had really loved. These mates were usually on their deathbeds. I just stopped to say goodbye and make their passing easier. Most died happy because I appeared to them in my reborn state. I looked at them as I did 50 to 70 years before when we had met. I would sneak into their rooms at night, hug them, kiss them, and welcome them into their new life. For them, there was no new life, but the important fact was they died believing they died happy. They did not fear death. At that time, it was the only gift I could give them for sharing their lives with me. Over all my lifetimes, I never fathered any children. My wives tried, and I was very happy with their efforts, but alas, there were no offspring. I had long come to believe that whatever gave me eternal life also kept me from passing that gift on to any offspring. Medical science grew by leaps and bounds over the years, and my sterility was tested. The doctors concluded that I was fertile, but for some unknown reason, my wives could not conceive. Oh, we tried everything, IVF, donor carriers, nothing worked. My sperm all died trying to fertilize an egg. I knew nothing would work, but I tried for my mate's mental health. Occasionally one of my wives became pregnant, we both knew it wasn't mine. Most left me in shame. Some tried lying, and a few took their lives because of their shame. I felt no pity for them because they tried to cheat on me. They got what they deserved. Anyway, back to my story. I was visiting a company I owned prior to selling it to myself. It was a nice little business, but it had become bloated over the years. If I sold it, I could reduce the bloat, as a new owner always did when they merged. The good people stayed on, the bad, well, you know. This was survival of the fittest, modern-era style. One of the executives had a personal assistant, Sophia, with him as we toured the facilities. She was about the prettiest thing I had seen in a long time. Her boss was an idiot, but looking at her made my time with him almost palatable. Every time I glimpsed at her, I was greeted by a smile. The merger went as planned. Her boss was separated, and Sophia was assigned to me. So began our romance. We traveled the world together, as I had planned. We only saw the most beautiful and romantic places. I wined her and dined her but made no moves on her. I was always the perfect gentleman. We stayed in the best hotels and their best suites and always traveled by private jet. She was always on my arm, wearing nothing but designer clothes. She saw the real power of wealth, she was hooked on everything money could do. Sophia watched the big man, the company she worked for. He was handsome, that was the first thing she noticed. Her boss had been living in fear of his visit for weeks, since it was announced he would tour their facilities. She liked her boss. He had taken the place of her long-dead father in her heart. She did not like his nervousness. The big man finally arrived. He was polite, projecting a very strong aura of power. Everyone walked on eggs around him. She watched her boss reduced to a blathering idiot when pressed to answer a few in-depth questions put to him by the big guy. She tried to protect her boss by flirting with this arrogant jerk, but it didn't work. Her boss was still crushed under questioning. She watched as her boss became a shell of his former self. She developed a hatred for the new guy. She vowed to get even for the destruction of her substitute father. 6 weeks later, the merger was completed. Her boss and substitute father was terminated. The terms of his separation were more than fair, but he was only a shadow of his former self. He had lost his wife and daughter to a drunk driver. His job was the only thing that kept him from losing his mind. 2 weeks after his firing, he committed suicide. She vowed revenge against the new owner, not only for destroying her dad but for not even noticing his death. About a month after the funeral, much to her surprise, she was asked by HR to report to corporate headquarters in Seattle. She was told that the big guy wanted to interview her for a possible executive position. They sent her home to her apartment to pack an overnight bag. At 6 p.m., a limo picked her up and deposited her at the foot of one of the corporate jets. They flew to Seattle, and she was set up in one of the corporate suites at the Charles Hotel. She had a very poor night's sleep because of her nerves. The next morning, she was up, dressed, and looking very beautiful when she was picked up again by another limo. She was driven to a private club and escorted to a private dining room. There she found the big man. He was impeccably dressed and appeared to be waiting for her. As she walked over to the table, he rose and introduced himself. "Hi, I'm Ethan Thompson. Thank you for joining me for breakfast. May I call you Sophia, and please call me Ethan." That's how her new life started. He invited her to accompany him on his business day. He had asked her to be his PA, but first wanted her to understand how much work it really entailed. By the time the day was over, she was hooked on the power and luxury the position afforded her. She accepted the job. It was every woman's dream job, plus it kept her close to him so that she could plan her revenge. Sophia soon gave up her old apartment and moved into a suite in the hotel. A few days after moving in, a fashion consultant and personal shopper showed up at her door. The woman explained, "Hi, my name's Olivia. Mr. Thompson hired me to update your wardrobe. I just need to learn your sizes and tastes before beginning." Sophia was stunned. She gave all her personal information and was told to go take a shower. When she finished her shower, she found Olivia waiting in the bedroom with loads of boxes. "These are some selections and intimates for you to try on," Olivia explained. Olivia helped Sophia start handing her garments to try on. She stated that Sophia needed a bit of grooming. She got on her phone while Sophia was still trying to regain her senses. A crew from the salon arrived at her door. Olivia invited them in, and Sophia soon found herself getting a hairstyling, manicure, and facial. 2 hours later, Olivia was finished with the makeover. Standing in front of her mirror, Sophia realized that she was, in fact, beautiful. She could not believe the change. As Sophia marveled at her transformation, she felt that Olivia was correct. Olivia started helping her try these garments on. Olivia was like a crazy woman. Clothes or garments that Sophia thought were perfectly acceptable were called garbage by Olivia and discarded. It took all day, but finally, Olivia was happy, and Sophia's walk-in closet was full of both business and evening attire. And then there were the shoes, purses, and accessories. It goes without saying that Sophia was overwhelmed. Olivia charged back into the bedroom and started attacking Sophia's closet, looking for the perfect outfit. Why? Because Sophia was to accompany the boss to dinner at his club at 8 p.m. When Sophia arrived at the club, she was treated like visiting royalty. They opened all doors for her and escorted her to a private dining room. As she crossed through the main restaurant, she felt all eyes on her. The men were in awe, and the women were envious. Sophia loved the feelings she was experiencing. When they led her into the private dining room, she found Ethan standing beside the table waiting for her. He looked so handsome, perfectly groomed, and in his expensive tux. He was smiling at her. She felt her heart melt. He walked over, took her in his arms, and kissed her cheek. "You look beautiful tonight. Thank you for joining me for dinner," he said. Sophia felt excited. "Damn, he's getting to me. This will make my vengeance a little harder," she thought. They had a very enjoyable meal. When the limo arrived back at her hotel, he kissed her on the cheek and walked her to the doorman. As much as she wanted him to, he did not attempt to join her in her room. "Damn, I'll need a cold shower tonight for sure," she thought. Sophia found herself traveling with him to all the beautiful places. His businesses were varied and all over the world. Sophia found herself loving being with him. Where they went, he was always treated like a visiting god, and by association, so was she. Sophia had been his PA for about 6 months when she decided to move the relationship up a notch. She had a rough plan for her revenge and wanted him nearer to her. They were in a hotel on the Mediterranean coast. They had a 2-bedroom suite. After a day of shopping and looking at all the beautiful sights, and a fine dinner, Sophia decided that tonight was the night to implement phase 1 of her plan. That night, when they had adjourned to their respective rooms, Sophia took a long, relaxing bath. After some time, she walked into his bedroom. He was awake, as she expected, still working. He took one look at her and carried her into his bed. It was a wonderful night. He was a wonderful lover. From that point on, if they were together, she never slept alone. Less than a year later, they were married. "We were great together, we never argued, we never fought. We were the perfect couple. So why did she take my life?" Ethan thought. Ethan pondered while he was being regenerated. His business plans should have been working. All his companies were being transferred to holding companies where they were automatically protected from being looted by his wives or his trusted employees. Unusually, his spouse died before him, so these plans were not normally needed. "Hey, I was immortal. Once in a while, I was killed in a plane crash or car wreck, and in these cases, my wives were allowed to keep receiving incomes to live on while I, under a new identity, ran my businesses. But this was the first time my wife was responsible for my death. I felt the need for revenge against her even more." He got out of the pool and looked around. He was familiar with the surroundings. The pool was located in a secret location on an island he owned in the Indian Ocean. No one could see him as he walked to the house he had built there. He put his eye to the electronic security system. It beeped, indicating that it recognized him. He liked these new electronic gadgets. They were much easier than hiding a key under the mat and much more secure. He walked in and fired up his satellite communication system. Soon, he had a signal and was booting a PC to check on his companies and how the transfers to new ownership were coming. Well, he was surprised when he found that nothing was happening. He looked at the date and realized that he had been dead about 6 months. All the assets should have been transferred by now. What went wrong? He started digging into all the automatic controls he had developed over the years. He finally came across the one common denominator: the systems all thought he was still alive in his old existence. Someone was logging in daily to his personal account with his username and password. If he didn't log in daily, the processes started automatically. There was only one person who could have succeeded in capturing his password: his wife, Lauren. The same wife that took his life. He tried to log in as his old self and found that the password had been changed. Someone thought that by changing the password, they could keep anyone out. I guess someone had never heard of a backdoor. The first thing he did after logging in was assess the damage they had done to his empire. After a few days, he determined that someone was funneling cash out of his businesses and into offshore bank accounts. He examined the programs in operation and was surprised by how slick they were. Whoever wrote them knew what they were doing, how his corporate structure was organized, and how not to get caught. He began to suspect the individuals behind the thefts, but he needed proof before taking action. He loved this. The thrill of the chase and all that. It had been a couple of 100 years since he was this excited. Unfortunately for the thieves, he owned those banks through a series of interlocking corporations, so he could stop the bleeding of his wealth without alerting them. Another couple of hours worth of work and he had the money hitting the offshore accounts and then transferring from those accounts to other accounts he controlled. After each transfer, his little program erased all traces of the transfer. It would appear to anyone looking that the transfer never worked, the money never appeared, but it still disappeared from the corporation. If the thieves spotted the missing money, they would have one hell of a time figuring out exactly what was wrong. Once he finished protecting his fortune, he decided to see exactly where he was supposed to be. He knew that all his systems knew he was still alive when, in fact, they should have known he was dead. He knew he'd need to rethink the whole system. Maybe he'd attach some type of heart monitor to determine if his heart was still beating. This was going to be so much fun. Reading his email and his travel plans, he learned that his widow and he were on an extended cruise aboard one of his yachts. They were accompanied by 3 of his most senior executives. I guess I found my culprits, he thought. They all knew the current structure of all my businesses. If I stayed dead, they could clean me out. It was now my turn to teach them a lesson. He spent the next 2 days instituting failsafe so that no one could hack his systems until he figured out a better system. When he was done, it would appear that their plan was working, but in reality, it wasn't. Not being able to die had resulted in him developing an attitude toward human life. Because of that attitude, he wanted just to sink the yacht. But then he remembered the 10 crew members aboard. They were just doing their jobs and not involved in his demise. So, he had to be a little more subtle in obtaining his vengeance. No sense in hurting innocents, so he started a more complicated plan. The captain of the yacht received a notice from the manufacturer of the yacht, another company Ethan owned, to dock at the nearest port. A structural weakness was discovered, and the boat was in danger of sinking in heavy seas. Please return to port for repairs, directed the communication. The boat was near enough to Caribbean, so they stopped there for repairs. The yacht was placed in dry dock, forcing the conspirators to relocate to some property Ethan owned on a small island. There, his wife and her partners in crime hid themselves. I guess they didn't want it to be discovered that I wasn't with them. There might be too many questions asked by authorities as they fed themselves away. Ethan started executing his plans for them. Living as long as he had learned many tricks. In the Dark Ages, he was a mage. As the years progressed, he became a great archer, a swordsman. With the advent of gunpowder, he became a rifle and pistol expert. He trained in all the Oriental forms of martial arts. He had developed into a very formidable adversary. It was through the use of these skills that he was going to extract his vengeance. The island Ethan owned was very private. There were all sorts of electronic surveillance and armed guards designed to ensure his privacy, but again, he developed the system, so he knew its weaknesses. Soon, he was inside the compound and hiding in the underbrush. His 3 executives were all between 55 and 62 years old. They had led the good life, and they let their bodies slide into disrepair. Ethan's first target was one of the fatter ones. He was ripe for a heart attack, and Ethan was going to help him have one. One of the nice things about being rich was having all the best toys, and boy, did Ethan have them. As he watched his fat former friend to learn his habits, he remembered his holographic projector. It was state-of-the-art. It had 6 projectors that projected a very high-quality image. The projectors were very small size-wise, but very powerful. He set them up around the lounge chair his fat friend favored for his evening cigar and cognac. This was going to be fun. The next night, Ethan was waiting for him. He dropped into his chair and lit a cigar. Ethan walked in front of the cameras and started talking. "Hello, Marcus. I'm back." His fat friend Marcus stared in wonder. When he last saw Ethan, he was a 47-year-old guy with gray hair and age lines on his face. What he saw in front of him was a 20-year-old in perfect health with an evil smile. "It can't be. You're dead," Marcus exclaimed. "Lauren told us she did it." "I know, Marcus," Ethan said, "that's why I came back to get all of you." "I want you to join me in death," Ethan said, grinning his evilest grin. "Just let me touch you. That's all it will take, just a brief moment of pain, and it's all over. The only problem is that you won't be going to a nice place like I did. You'll be going to the hot place. I understand that there, you'll feel pain forever." Ethan started moving toward him. He could see the sweat appear on Marcus's forehead, and see his chest straining as his heart beat harder and harder. "No, stay away. I don't want to die," Marcus pleaded. Ethan saw the pain appear on his face as his heart beat faster and faster. He was also having trouble breathing. Ethan held his arms out to him. "I didn't want to die either, but you and your friends didn't think of what I wanted. Come to me, Marcus. The pain won't be that bad," Ethan said as he made the holographic image walk through some lawn furniture. Marcus rolled off his lounger and tried to stand. He grabbed his chest, obviously in pain, and collapsed on the lawn. Ethan watched as his chest stopped moving and his eyes lost their luster. About an hour later, some of the servants came looking for Marcus. They tried to resuscitate him, but it was too late. He was long dead. Ethan smiled in the darkness, trying to decide who his next victim would be. The next day, Ethan spotted one of his other executives walking on the beach, getting ready to swim in the ocean. Ethan stripped completely and covered himself with what looked like sunscreen. Ethan watched him frolic for nearly an hour before he left the water and started drying off. He swam alone. A plan slowly formed in Ethan's mind. He never really liked him, so he enjoyed his plan for him. His first step was to attract some sharks to the area he swam in, some very big, very hungry sharks. For the next week, Ethan gathered up the discarded meat and fish parts from the garbage. The cooks were always trying to prepare very fancy dishes, so there was a lot of waste. Ethan gathered up that waste and kept putting it in the water near where Ethan swam in the mornings. By the end of the week, the sharks were gathering in wait for Ethan to feed them. Every morning at sunrise, there was something about Ethan that the sharks didn't like, so they stayed away from him as he swam out with their food. As soon as he swam away, they went into a feeding frenzy. Ethan had watched Ethan cover himself with sunscreen before swimming every day. One day, he snuck out of the underbrush and stole his sunscreen. Ethan never missed it when he left the beach. That night, Ethan mixed some of the sunscreen with fish paste. The sunscreen had a strong enough odor that the fish smell would be disguised to the human nose. Ethan knew that the sharks would smell the fish odor through the sunscreen. He dropped the tube near the route Ethan always took back to the compound. He left it in a spot Ethan would notice as he walked to the beach. It looked as if he had dropped it the day before when he left. The next morning, Ethan didn't feed the sharks. He wanted them hungry and hanging around the area. Ethan found his sunscreen as he headed to the ocean. Ethan watched as he liberally covered his body with the doctored sunscreen and then started his swim. Ethan followed his normal custom. He swam straight out into the sea for about a quarter mile before turning back. He almost made the turn before the first shark hit him. He started to scream, but was dragged under the water before he could generate any real volume to alert possible rescuers. Ethan darted out of the brush and grabbed the tainted sunscreen. It was about an hour later, as Ethan watched from his hiding place, when the last of his former executives, Vincent, walked down to the beach and called out for Ethan. He looked at Ethan's towel and belongings, then called a few more times, looking out to sea. As he was standing there, a really big great white shark broke the surface and rolled on its side. Plainly visible in its mouth was a human arm. Vincent stared for a moment, then vomited in the sand. Ethan retreated into the undergrowth. Soon, the beach was crowded with police and others. Ethan stayed hidden and watched all the commotion. The police had trouble believing that 2 men had died on this small island in such a short time. They questioned all the help, Vincent, and Lauren. They were looking for Ethan but couldn't get a straight answer from anyone as to where he was. They had reports from his headquarters that he was on an extended vacation with his wife, but they couldn't find him anywhere. They were good cops and very suspicious, but they could find no proof of foul play. As Ethan snuck away, he thought, 2 down, 2 to go. Vincent left the island and returned to Barbados on the police launch. Lauren stayed on the island. Ethan was tempted to stay on the island as well, but he needed to get to one of his computers and start the failsafe program to begin the transfers of his holdings to his new identity. He'd get back to her later, but first, he wanted to cut off their funds and any possible escape routes. He waited a few days and used an outrigger canoe to paddle to a larger, more inhabited island. From there, he grabbed a water taxi to a bigger population center on another island, and finally booked a seat on an inter-island flight to Honolulu. He was closing in on Vincent. Soon, he would have his vengeance on him as well. Vincent was not going to be easy, though. The police were keeping him under close surveillance because he was a suspect in Ethan's disappearance. Someone noticed that Ethan was missing, as well as the deaths of the other 2. Then there was the fact that Vincent was staying at the Royal Caribbean, one of Honolulu's best hotels. He was in a suite on the top floor. It was going to be hard to get to him, but Ethan would figure out a way. After all, he had all the time in the world. Lauren couldn't believe how lucky she had become. First, Marcus had died of a heart attack. He was a weak link in the plan and had to be eliminated anyway. When a servant told her that he had succumbed to the heart attack, she almost slipped and smiled. Marcus was the computer guy who automated the transfer code. He ran the information systems at the corporate headquarters. He created the methodology for the transfers and then divided the actual coding up among different areas. This way, no one single group was able to determine exactly what the code accomplished. Lauren didn't like him. He was fat, sweaty, and arrogant. He demanded to sleep with her for his cooperation. She needed him, so she complied. She got no pleasure from servicing him. It was just another step in her plan. As she was servicing him one evening, she thought back to her husband. God, I hated that man. Because of him and her desire to get back at him, she was forced to have an intimate relationship with this pig. It was another reason to hate him. Soon, she would accomplish her revenge on Ethan. Then she would no longer need these helpers. She was looking forward to eliminating all her partners. Marcus's death due to heart failure and Vincent's death at the hands of a few sharks proved fortunate. Her first and second problems were eliminated. She didn't believe in fortune. If he wasn't dead, she would have blamed Ethan, but she knew he was dead. She herself had repeatedly stabbed him in the back and chest until he stopped reacting to the knife. She then pushed him overboard and watched his dead body sink into the depths. His dead eyes were open and staring at the water as it closed over his head. The police suspected Vincent. They made him accompany them back to Barbados so they could continue questioning him and watch him closely. Lauren waited a week before sneaking off the island and disappearing. Ethan remembered when one day, Lauren suggested an extended vacation on their yacht. We could cruise to all the beautiful places for 3 to 4 months, she claimed. You're working too much and need to relax. It took almost 3 weeks for Ethan to conclude all the deals he was working on, but eventually, off they went. It was just the 2 of them and a crew of 10 to run the yacht. Okay, it wasn't quite as intimate as he would have liked, but the crew stayed out of sight as much as possible, and that was quite a feat for the male members of the crew because Lauren stayed naked every time she went on deck. It kept Ethan very distracted. Lauren had lured her husband, Ethan, onto the boat. They set out on a cruise to all the beautiful places. The cruise was just the 2 of them and the crew. She needed the crew to give them complete privacy to complete her plan to kill Ethan, so she stayed naked. Once they were out to sea, the crew kept away from any of the places where her body could be seen. This fit her plan. It was as if she and Ethan were the only ones on the ship. She set her eyes on a piece of low-life crew member to use to kill Ethan. Her best weapon was to use her body to convince him. So, she took the poor fool into her bed, then she would use him to eliminate her husband. But not all her plans went as she had hoped. When the time came to eliminate Ethan, her lover wouldn't follow through. So, Lauren had a plan B. She pulled the trigger on her husband when the time came. Ethan used his new alias to rent a house on the ocean and another alias to rent a suite in the hotel. In the house, he added some computer equipment so he could watch his business empire, as well as sneak a peek on his widow and her accomplices whenever he found it necessary. In the suite, Ethan set up a very sophisticated surveillance system to monitor Vincent's comings and goings. He was now waiting for Vincent to make a move. Ethan started recovering emails addressed to each of them from the archives, waiting for Vincent to make his next move. He had time, so he read all the emails. After a couple of days of reading, a pattern developed. It seemed Lauren had started her campaign about 14 months before. She began by luring Vincent into her grips. Vincent was Ethan's most senior executive, and because of that position, he ruled Ethan's empire. It appeared Ethan had granted him a little too much power and not enough supervision. Lauren slowly seduced Vincent into her bed. Once there, he was hooked. Ethan knew how easy it was to become hooked because he had been in that bed as well. When she had him, she began her campaign to steal Ethan's wealth. Vincent was hopelessly in love and followed Lauren's every direction. Lauren was a very smart girl. She made the plans, and Vincent saw to their execution. Ethan was a little proud of her. She was very thorough. He guessed he could pick real performers, too bad he missed the character flaw that made her want to kill him. He would need to be a little more careful in the future when he picked the next woman he would marry. Soon, Vincent needed some specialized help, so he brought in Ethan and Marcus to the plot. The four of them developed and started the plan. The plan was simple: move all Ethan's money to their offshore accounts in small batches, that way they could steal billions without it being noticed. Only Lauren, Ethan's loving wife, knew that Ethan needed to die for the plan to succeed. One night, they were on the deck, recovering from a very energetic lovemaking session, when Lauren called Ethan over to the rail to point something out to him. As Ethan looked over the edge, Lauren stabbed him with a steak knife in the chest. As he stood there in amazement, she repeatedly stabbed him, then pushed him overboard and tossed the knife in after him. She made sure no one saw her. She actually watched him sink into the dark water with a smile on her face. Ethan really didn't understand why she looked so happy. He never hit her. He always made sure that her monthly allowance was a couple of $2 million a month. And if she ran short 1 month, he would put a few more $2 million in her account, no questions asked. Whatever she wanted, she got. As he sank into the depths, Ethan thought, she tried to kill me. I wonder why. The next morning, Lauren emailed Vincent 2 little words: "It's done." He arranged for Marcus and Ethan to join him as he flew out to the yacht. As the Brits say, the game was afoot. They started the money transfers. They wanted to get as much transferred before it was noticed that Ethan was missing. Lauren kept her lover hidden in the main stateroom. She had the thrill of using his body while telling the crew that Ethan was under the weather and resting in bed. One night, after making love on the deck, she tossed her dead lover's body over the rail, another problem eliminated. Now all she had to do was eliminate her co-conspirators, and her plan would be complete. She had made her plans for their deaths, but right now, she needed them for a bit longer. But as soon as their parts in the plan were completed, they were gone, along with most of the crew. She planned to arrange to sink the boat. As Ethan read her emails and electronic personal diary, he realized that she was truly heartless. It would be challenging to outfox her. It had been many lifetimes since he had a worthy adversary. This was going to be fun, and besides, he owed her one for the knifing. Ethan decided to take some time for his story. He told himself, "I have lived somewhere between 300 and 400 years. I am 6 feet tall and weigh about 215 pounds. My body is hard from exercise and looks as if I'm carved out of stone. My hair is a dirty blonde, and my eyes, well, let me explain my eyes. They are a little strange. They are green, no big deal, but the pupils are where they differ from normal human eyes. If you look closely into my eyes, you will notice that my pupils are elongated slightly. My pupils look more like a reptile's than a human's. They are not perfectly round. Over the thousands of years, I learned to keep my eyelids slightly closed, hiding the deformity. Once civilization progressed far enough, I started having contacts specially made to hide the deformity so that my pupils looked round just like everyone else. Because of my eyes, I knew I wasn't a member of the human race. I could never have a family or children. I had to hide my differences, so I was destined to be alone forever. In my early years, human hunters killed me because my eyes were different from theirs. That's why I learned to hide my differences. Ethan continued, I don't know why, but my night vision is perfect. I can see as well in complete darkness as I can in bright sunshine. And for some reason, my sense of smell is like a bloodhound's. It's funny, but for all my differences, animals like me. Dogs, upon seeing me, start wagging their tails. Cats are my friends, and all other forms of wildlife greet me. I have no idea why this occurs, but it can be handy. It's funny, but no animal will attack me. Oh yeah, one more thing, I'm strong, inhumanly strong. Well, maybe not as strong as Superman, but I'm no chicken either. A couple of months had gone by, and Vincent must have started feeling confident. He started appearing in public. First it was just a walk on the beach, and then it moved up to lunch at various restaurants on the boulevard, and finally, nightclubbing. Ethan was watching him, waiting for a pattern to develop in his movements. As soon as he spotted a pattern, Ethan would make his move. One day, one of the alarms Ethan had put on the offshore accounts went off. Someone was trying to withdraw funds from that account. Soon, alarms were going off on all the offshore accounts Vincent and Lauren had created. The banks were getting phone calls from a very worried Vincent. Soon, he realized the accounts were empty. So did the hotel. He was soon out on the street. Ethan followed him around Honolulu, watching and waiting for him to stop someplace. Ethan noticed Vincent talking very hastily on his cell phone. Since Ethan wasn't on his PC, he couldn't be sure, but he was almost certain that Vincent was telling Lauren that her plans had gone belly up and all the money was gone. Ethan wished he could have heard that conversation. Once Vincent hung up, he started walking toward Sugarloaf Mountain. Ethan followed. Vincent spent the next hour climbing to the top. He waited until the tourists had all left before climbing over the railing. He just stood there, as if he couldn't make up his mind whether or not to jump. Ethan decided to help him decide. Hello, Vincent. Want me to help? Ethan's familiar voice rang out. Vincent turned at the sound, and when he saw Ethan, he screamed, "No. You're supposed to be dead." Vincent started backing up, but he reached the edge and fell. Ethan listened to his screams all the way down. 3 down, 1 to go, Ethan thought. By the time Ethan returned to his island, Lauren had disappeared without a trace. There was no sign of her anywhere. Ethan started hunting her down again. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and finally, after about 2 years, Ethan was almost ready to give up. He was enjoying the weather in Bali, having been there about a month, and was contemplating where his next stop would be in his effort to find Lauren. One day, as Ethan was walking along the beach, he saw her. No, it wasn't Lauren, but a woman who truly grabbed his attention. She was beautiful and was smiling directly at him. Now, Ethan wasn't usually affected by beautiful women, but this one was different. He hadn't been attracted to a woman like that in hundreds of years, but there was something about her. She walked right up to him and said, "Hi, I'm Natalie. I think I've been waiting for you all my life." Ethan, still trying to come up with a witty line, felt a strange sensation when she removed her sunglasses. He found himself looking into eyes exactly like his own. She had the same elongated pupils he did. She smiled. "I've always known you were here," she said. "I've been looking for you for thousands of years. Shall we see if we're destined to be mates?" Ethan grinned. "Hi, I'm Ethan. You have a great idea." They walked along the beach until they found a coffee shop to rest and get acquainted. They drank coffee until they thought their bladders would explode. The longer they talked, the more Ethan grew fond of her. She talked about her existence, how she reached womanhood about 500 years ago. At that time, she started sensing Ethan's presence. She didn't know who he was or how to find him, but she knew he was destined to be her mate. As time passed, she tried to find him, only appearing where Ethan had been after he had already left. 2 weeks ago, she had felt his presence in Mexico while she was in Oregon. They were close. She bought a ticket on the next flight to Bali. When the plane landed, she felt Ethan nearby while arranging for a rental car. She ran out of the agent's office, started trying to find him. She was so close to him now that her body ached for him. Then, she found him, and she knew he was the one. As they sat together, Ethan noticed a very pleasing aroma emanating from her. He didn't recognize the perfume, but she must have noticed him sniffing because she smiled and said, "That's the smell of my excitement. Being so close to you excites me." Ethan smiled from ear to ear as he took her hand, and they walked to his rented house. They ended up making love all night, and the next morning, Ethan knew they were meant to be. It was the first time he had ever felt that way. He looked into her eyes and felt complete for the first time in his life. She looked back up into his eyes and said, "I love you. Our baby will be a perfect little girl when we're ready. I'll give you the best baby in the world." Ethan smiled. "You already have," she answered. He looked at her with questioning eyes. "We women know when we're with child," she added. Later that afternoon, they got up, showered, and ate. They couldn't keep their hands off each other. They went for a walk, holding hands the entire time. As far as they were concerned, they were the only two people on Earth. Come to think of it, they were the only two people on Earth of their kind. Over the next few months, they got closer than Ethan had ever been with another person in all his lives. It was as if they were meant for each other. Natalie's stomach started showing the baby, and they were sitting together on the couch one evening when she said, "I just felt her kick. Put your hand here." Ethan gave her a funny look. "Her mothers know the gender of our children," was the reply he got. He put his hand on Natalie's belly and, for the first time, felt his daughter move. He knew it was a daughter, but he also knew better than to question Natalie. One night after making love, he told Natalie all about Lauren. He explained about their marriage, her deceit, how she tried to kill him, how she tried to steal his wealth, how she planned to eliminate her partners and keep everything for herself, and how much he hated her and wished for vengeance. Later that month, Natalie asked him, "Do you still want to find Lauren?" Ethan nodded. "I feel her nearby." "Let's go hunting," Natalie replied with a big smile. "I still owe her for trying to kill my men. I think she should suffer." Ethan glanced over at Natalie and knew she meant exactly what she said. He made a note never to get this woman mad at him. Natalie and Ethan returned home and sat by a globe in Ethan's study. She started rotating the globe with one finger, tracing its turning. She suddenly stopped the globe at Portugal. She looked at him. "She's living on a small island near Azores." 3 days later, they were on a plane heading to the Mediterranean. They traveled by train to Azores. There, they set up a love nest in a small villa. They started renting sailboats and cruising the islands. On the 3rd day, Natalie grabbed Ethan's hand and pointed at a small island. "She's there. But I also sense a small presence with her. I think she has had a child," Natalie said. Then she looked at Ethan and said, "You can't hurt her child. I won't allow it. He did nothing to harm you, and besides, we are going to deprive him of a mother." Ethan knew better than to argue, so he just nodded in agreement. They spent the rest of the week investigating the island. It was only about 5 square miles and roughly round in shape. It was very rocky and only suited to raising goats and olives. There were some vacation villas on the seaward side of the island. Lauren was living in one of the smaller ones, facing the west. They quietly rented a villa as far east as possible. They started their plan to make Natalie friends with Lauren. Natalie would not let Ethan near Lauren. She knew Lauren would recognize him and flee again. Ethan was not to be recognized by Lauren until it was time for their vengeance. It was easy for Natalie to make friends with Lauren. All women formed a bond with pregnant women. Natalie used these natural instincts to make friends with Lauren. After about a week, the two of them were going everywhere together. Natalie told Lauren that her husband, Ethan, was still working, and it would be a couple of weeks before he arrived. So, Ethan had to stay hidden in the villa where he couldn't be seen. Ethan was bored during the days without Natalie, but she made him forget that boredom at night, so he was a very happy guy. One night, after making love, Natalie and Ethan were recovering when she said, "I think we're ready to get even. We'll let her suffer for a few weeks, then execute our final vengeance." After a week, they started phase 2 of the plan they had devised for Lauren. One evening at dusk, Lauren found herself standing on a bluff overlooking the sea. She stood there, watching the water, when a little voice in her head told her to strip. Without really realizing what was happening, she did. Suddenly, Ethan stepped out of the shadows. "Hi, Lauren. Remember me? You killed me with a knife," he called out. As she turned around, Ethan showed her his eyes for the first time. Her eyes widened into large saucers as her hands went over her mouth to stifle a scream. She started backing up, but the edge of the cliff was behind her. She stumbled and backed up further, looking like she might fall. Instead, she turned and ran, screaming, back toward the village. Ethan didn't move to chase her, but instead, he reveled in tormenting her. He could have easily caught her, but he wanted to save her every moment. The locals saw her running naked through the village, screaming that she had seen a monster on the cliff. They quickly took her to the hospital, and because of her ramblings, the doctors determined she wasn't of sound mind. She was placed in a mental institution. Ethan visited her a few nights later. By the time he was done, her mind was completely shattered, or at least that's what the doctors thought. She kept screaming that she had seen a dead man and that he wasn't human. There was nothing wrong with Lauren's mind, however. Ethan wanted her to know that he was alive and still out there, waiting for her. Her behavior was noted by the staff, and they thought her illness was worsening. Lauren's son was put up for adoption by the authorities, as they believed Lauren would never regain her sanity. But Natalie and Ethan adopted him. They didn't want him to suffer for his mother's crimes. They would raise him as their own son. After the adoption, Natalie and Ethan quietly sailed away from the island. For some reason, Natalie wanted to stay on Ethan's island in the Indian Ocean, the one where he had been reincarnated for centuries. She wanted their baby to be born there. One night, they made love for hours, and Ethan eventually drifted off to sleep. At some point during the night, he felt Natalie start to get up. He reached out to stop her, but she whispered, "I'll be right back." Ethan, so exhausted, fell back to sleep. The next time he woke up, Natalie was next to him in bed. He started to hug her, but she grabbed his arm. "Be careful, you'll hurt her." It took a second for her words to sink in, and then Ethan understood. He sat up, looking at Natalie. She had a small child lying against her chest, nursing. Their daughter, Isla, had been born. Ethan carefully kissed Natalie as she tried to show him their child. He looked at the baby lying against her chest, and she was about half the size of a human baby. Ethan must have shown some form of concern, but Natalie just smiled. "She's the correct size. Our children are born smaller so that the mother feels no pain." Ethan blinked. "But she's 2 months early." Natalie smiled again. "No, that's the normal time for us." There was one more thing Natalie needed to show Ethan. She unwrapped the blankets from around their daughter, and Ethan saw it. His daughter had a small tail. It was sort of cute, for a tail, that is. "It will disappear before she's 1 year old, Natalie whispered. Ethan gently touched the tail, and it wrapped around his finger. He felt a strange tingling in his hand. "Don't move yet, she's learning about you," Natalie whispered. As the years passed, Ethan often wondered how Natalie knew all this about their daughter, but she never told him. He watched their child grow, and Isla grew into a beautiful young woman, just like her mother. Lauren's son, now a young man, turned out to be gifted. He soon graduated from college and started working his way up in Ethan's businesses. But Isla was actually in charge. After all, she was immortal. Before long, 60 years had passed. Ethan and Natalie had to disappear from this life and start another. Too many of their age group had died, and they would start to stand out. Isla would understand because she was also immortal. Their son and his family were normal, and they would grieve for Ethan and Natalie's loss. For them, Ethan felt sad. One night, as Ethan and Natalie sat discussing their future, Natalie interrupted him. "I sense another like us on this planet. He is a male, and Isla will find him someday. They will be a pair. So, we won't be returning here?" Ethan asked. Natalie replied, "No, we won't. There's only one pair like us allowed per planet." Ethan nodded, but he wasn't about to argue with her. "Will we still be together?" he asked. "Yes," was all she said. "Then let's begin the journey," Ethan replied. The next morning, the staff found Ethan and Natalie. They went to investigate why the couple didn't come down for breakfast. They remarked how peaceful and happy the couple looked as they found them lying together. Ethan and Natalie's family and friends mourned them as they were buried at sea. But somewhere in the universe, two individuals were reborn, this time, together. Thanks for watching. If you lived countless lives, would you seek revenge or forgiveness after betrayal? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.